Hey everyone, so in today's video I'm doing a custom doll repaint. I'm doing hair, the face up, the clothing, the whole thing. And at the time I'm filming this intro, it's 4:45 Friday evening and I'm still not done. She will be finished in this video, but I figured I would film the intro now before I look like absolute crap because I'm probably not gonna finish this till like 5 a.m. I think trying to get this doll done in 3 days was a little too ambitious, but oh well. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the doll making. So I'm using a Clio as my base, and if you saw the Wednesday video, you saw me going out and hunting for all the doll supplies and which ones I ended up finding, and this is the one I decided to use for this project. There were some dolls with rounder faces, which probably would have looked more like my artwork, but I just really liked this doll. I decided to start with the hair, which I'm making out of yarn, and I watched some tutorials on YouTube on how to do this. You pretty much brush out yarn until it's nice and soft and hair-like. This is just yarn I got from Value Village, and it had a questionable brown section in it, and when I opened it up, it did look like it maybe was a mouse turd. I don't know, that's kind of gross, so I cut all those chunks out. And then Midnight came along when I wasn't looking and stole my yarn. Then I wrapped the yarn around a DVD case. It's just a really quick way to get a bunch of pieces of the same length, because then I cut them on the side, and the crack on the side of the DVD case works really well for cutting. Then I folded the yarn in half and tied it to this grate just to hold it down while I brushed it. I used a pet brush with little wire bristles. And then I straightened the pieces, which is the magical moment. It's so satisfying seeing it go from all frizzy and fluffy to silky and smooth, because it looks like real hair. At least it looks like my hair, because my hair is pink. And then I would set the chunks down on a piece of glass and put glue on the end to hold them all together. And then I just repeated that a whole bunch of times until I had 20 wefts. And this took me about 7 hours to do the hair, including what you'll see me do later when I peel them all off. And here's all the floof that came from the yarn that got stuck in the brush. There's so much excess. I'm gonna use some for her hair later because she has little balls in her hair. Then I busted out my chalk pastels so I could color the hair a little bit, because once I brushed it out, the yarn was a lot lighter and I wanted to darken the pink a little bit. It's not as dark as it is in my drawing, but I'm not trying to 100% replicate the drawing. I wanted it to look a little closer just to my hair color, and my hair is various shades of pink because as it fades it gets lighter and lighter, but I just wanted to add a little extra touch. I tried using a brush with powdered pastel and it wasn't really working, so I just colored directly on the hair with the stick. Then I used a little spatula to peel off the wefts very carefully, and here's what they all look like together, yay! They were a little weak on the back because the glue didn't get all the way through, so I applied glue to the back side. Otherwise, when I cut the excess glue off the top, all the back pieces of hair would have just fallen off the weft, so I had to reinforce it. Then I had to cut off the doll's hair just using some scissors, chopped it all off, and I also had to remove her head. So the way I see it done online is people soak the head in hot water. I used water from my Keurig, which is why it looks really gross, because there's coffee residue in there, like little coffee beans. So that looks nasty, so I apologize for that. It's just the quickest way for me to get hot water. After a lot of struggling, I finally got her head off, and then it was time to pull out the plugs inside of her head to get the rest of the hair off. I was told in my Twitch chat that I could just shave her hair, but I just really wanted a clean head, and I was struggling to get through her neck hole, so I ended up slicing the back of her head, which I've also seen done in videos, and that was way easier and way quicker for me to get the hair chunks out. Here she is with all the hair removed, and the next step was to remove all the paint on her. So I'm using this acetone with some cotton balls and cotton swabs to rub off all of the paint. It comes off pretty easily, but it just starts smudging everywhere, so I had to constantly switch out to a fresh cotton ball to get it all off. And I used Q-tips for the little detail on the face, and I used a paper towel in my thumbnail to get in the crack of her lip. Here she is all clean and fancy. I sealed the crack in the back of her head with some hot glue, if you're wondering. I don't think I filmed that part. Then I painted her head with some pink paint since she's gonna have pink hair Honestly, I don't think this step was really necessary since I was just gonna glue the wefts on. If you were gonna be rerooting the doll, this would be more important, like sticking the hair back through the holes. But the way I did it, I think that paint step was not necessary at all, but it looks cool. Then I popped her head back on so I could start on her face up. I just thought it'd be easier to hold her if her head was on her body. Now the face up, boy, I struggled with this so hard. I don't have all the supplies that the big doll YouTubers use because I didn't want to run out and buy all this expensive crap, and I didn't want to have to buy anything I had to order online because I didn't want to wait for it to come in. I just thought I'll buy a few things, but then I'll make do with what I have. So I don't have Mr. Super Clear, but I do have a workable fixative, a matte workable fixative, which is kind of the same thing, I'm assuming. Like, it seals surfaces and creates texture so that you can color on top of them. And so that's what I used for this. I also do not have watercolor pencils, surprisingly. So I was trying to use my Prismacolors, and that was not working very well at all. I did manage to get some color down, but most pencils did almost nothing on the doll, and really my black was my best bet, and I had to use pastel to build up some of the color here and there, but it was a mess, so I had to resort to using acrylics, which I really didn't want to do. I've been avoiding doing doll face-ups. People have been suggesting it to me for so long, like, oh, you should try it, and I'm like, I hate painting tiny details, especially something like the face where there's eyes and you don't want them to be all wonky and they have to be symmetrical, and I just hate painting very, very fine lines with a paintbrush. So when I saw YouTubers doing it with just pencils and pastels, I was like, sweet, I'm down for that, but I didn't have the right stuff, so it didn't really work. And so she was looking pretty gross here. Nail stain. So that's when I broke down and used the acrylics. I really struggled with this. I couldn't get all the detail I wanted in her. Like, for example, I wanted to give her a waterline, but I was just struggling so much that I didn't bother putting one in. And so there's more stuff I could do if I was better at this. This is my first face up, so I'm not gonna be super good at it. I mean, it's still okay, but you know, not as good as the pros. I used some metallic paints for her eyes. I have this metallic brown color and a metallic gold, so I made sure to use that just to give her eyes a bit extra sparkle. I also made sure to add in some gray in the corner so that her eyes aren't just pure white. I maybe could have darkened it a little bit more because the gray is a little bit hard to see, but you know, I tried. I struggled trying to add highlights on things like the eyelids and all that. It just wasn't going well. But you know, she's okay. And her lower eye line, like kind of her lower lash line, I did end up thinning it out later on. You'll see in a little bit. So this is not her final form. And here I'm adding some eyelashes. They're just regular human false lashes. Well, not human hair, they're fake, but I mean, they're for real sized people. And I trimmed them down and glued them onto her eyes. I ended up, like I said, painting under her eyes. I mixed a skin color as close to hers as I could get and put it under her eyes. And then I also brushed on some light powder to highlight underneath her eyes and just touched up the powder in general, since the pastels seemed to be the easiest thing to work with on her face, even though initially it was not sticking at all and I was panicking, but I figured it out eventually. I also wish I could have got more crisp lines on the eyebrows. I just pretty much used pencil and tried darkening with a bit of pastel, and then I used an X-Acto knife to scrape away some of the color to make it look like hairs. Now all the glue is dry on my wefts, so I trimmed them down and started gluing them onto the doll's head using hot glue. You can make a wig cap and glue it to the wig cap, that way you can take the doll's hair on and off, but I don't plan on swapping anything out. This doll's meant to be permanent, and so everything on her is just getting glued on. The 20 wefts ended up being the perfect amount. At one point, I felt like I was one weft short, but then I found one on the ground that fell down, and so it ended up being perfect. These wefts aren't the thickest though, and so I did feel like it was a bit hard to hide the tracks at the top where her part is. To make the part, you just glue the hair the opposite way and flip the hair over, but I felt like since it was such a thin strip, you could still see the track underneath. It's not the worst, but I don't know, it felt like it didn't look as good as others I've seen. Overall though, I'm still really happy with her hair. I love the texture of it because it's not shiny like the nylon strands. It's just, I don't know, I love it. It's more realistic, I guess. And it's just so soft. It's like cotton candy on her head. Then it was time to get started on her outfit, which is fairly detailed. When I drew this character, I wasn't planning on turning it into a doll. In the future, I might draw something with the intention of it being a doll. If I do more dolls in the future, we'll see. Very time consuming. But yeah, so it was kind of hard to translate this random drawing into a doll and figure out how all the pieces were going to come together. So for her outfit, I decided to make the navy blue part one solid piece, even though when I drew it, I imagined it as being pants and a shirt. But just for simplicity, I thought, hey, I can just make it all one piece, and that way it stays together better and her shirt doesn't end up lifting or anything like that. I just thought it would tuck nicer underneath the skirt portion. I used this doll as my model at one point because I didn't want to get my other doll all dirty and get stuff in her hair. And I know you can wrap her, but I just didn't want any kinks in her hair, and I just used the other doll as my model because they have the exact same body. For the shirt, I struggled a little more to figure out what kind of pattern I wanted. Initially, I thought of a pattern where I'd have to pull it over her head, but I realized that isn't really good because I don't want to have to pop her head off again because I would destroy it in the process, destroy her hair and makeup. So I was like, okay, I need to come up with a different type of pattern. So I thought of the classic doll shirt where it does up in the back, but I don't have any teeny Velcro. I just have big Velcro that's way too thick. And so I thought I would just stitch her shirt on because, like I said, this is a permanent doll. I don't plan on taking off her clothes or her hair or her accessories. So I thought, okay, whatever, I'll just sew it up in the back when I put it on her. I also made her little red shorts by coloring some blue fabric with Copic markers. Originally, I was just going to paint her shorts onto the pants, but then I liked the pants so much and felt like I didn't want to wreck them by painting them, so I made little shorts for her. Her sleeves also ended up being too long on the light blue shirt. It's supposed to cut off at the elbow, but once I stitched it onto the rest of the shirt, it actually hung down lower. I was anticipating losing a bit of length from the seam, but it ended up hanging down even lower, so it almost looked like a full sleeve. The dark blue part didn't pull up quite high enough over her boobs, so I had to stitch it to her shirt underneath so that it wouldn't slip down and just so it'd hold its shape better in general. Then for the sleeves of the dark blue part, I made these little ruffled cuffs and slid them onto her arm. And man, is it hard working with such teeny tiny things. Also, I know I did not use a sewing machine. I just didn't feel comfortable using my sewing machine for something so tiny. I think I would have to practice a bit, which I didn't have time for, so I decided to just stitch it by hand. I painted on the little starry bits with some white acrylic paint, and then I got started on the skirt thingy, which I kind of screwed up on, I'm not gonna lie. In the picture, the front of it has this curve from the bottom hem up to the top, and I ended up making mine just a harsh 90-degree angle when it should have been a nice smooth curve. I just forgot about it, I guess. I wasn't looking at my reference enough. I was so focused on getting the right size and length for this and making sure that it stayed open in the front that I totally forgot to account for the shape. And by the time I realized that, I had already sewn the yarn on the bottom of the skirt, and I couldn't be bothered to go back and redo stuff. I was like, no, it's just gonna stay different because not everything on this doll is exactly like the drawing. Like, for example, on her light sleeves, the longer sleeves, I sewed on some yarn to the end because there is supposed to be a little pink lacy edge. And the frilly dark blue cuffs on her arms were also supposed to have a lace trim, but because it was all ruffled and whatnot, I was like, no, I'm skipping the trim. I think it's gonna look better like this. If I try adding it, it's gonna ruin it. So I'm making little changes here and there like that. Originally, I was gonna paint small beads to use for the beaded areas, but it was being really bad. The paint was chipping off and it was just a horrible experience. Then I remembered I have some beads already that I didn't get rid of, and I had similar colors to what I needed, so I ended up using those for the skirt instead, and I ended up using them later on for her staff because I had some bigger beads too. So pretty much all the beads I bought in the doll haul were pointless because I used beads I already had. I also got started on the beads for the staff at the time while I had all the bead parts out, and for the staff beads I ended up gluing 2 stars together on either side of the thread, and I thought that looked really good, whereas on the skirt I had just glued a single star to the final bead, and that didn't look as good, but I didn't want to go back and redo it all. I attached some bunched up ribbon around her waist for the frilly bit, and then I glued a little star on the front of it. These are those little butterfly push pin things. I just cut the back off of it and glued the star on. Then I also made a bow for the front of her shirt and wrapped the star around it this time because it has a little butterfly enclosures. I could just wrap it around the bow before gluing the bow onto her shirt. It looks so cute. I just love her midsection. I think that's my favorite part of the whole doll. It just looks so good with the bows and ribbons and the stars. Ugh. I also put a bow on her back because she does have one. I almost forgot that detail because it's hard to see in the actual drawing. Then for the boots, I didn't really know what to do because I didn't have any epoxy sculpting stuff and I didn't really want to do paper mache, which I've already seen. So I thought, hey, why don't I take these shoes that came on one of the dolls and then wrap a bunch of yarn around it and make it go up high like boots. Yay! So that's what I did. And I did more later to make it look more like boots, but yeah. I also just painted on her gloves because I didn't want to try to make little teeny doll gloves, and I just love the shape of their hands. They have such beautiful hand sculpts and I wanted that to be visible. I just took a little pipe cleaner and put it around her wrist to act as the cuff and then glued a tiny little star glitter onto her hand. Now her hair has these 3 balls in it, and so I took all that excess floof from when I brushed out the yarn, rolled it into balls, and attached it to a pipe cleaner because I didn't want to glue it onto her hair. Her hair just seemed really nice and I didn't want to muck it up by gluing stuff onto it, so I thought, okay, her entire headpiece is just going to be a headband including the balls of hair. I used some polymer clay to sculpt out the little triangle bits, and I also use it to sculpt out the star for the staff. Here I'm painting a wooden dowel for the staff, just with blue acrylics, and then painting on little white dots for the starry effect. Then once the clay was out of the oven, I painted it with some gold paint, just one little layer so some of the yellow would show through, just to give it a little golden sparkle. And I'm not gonna lie, I got a little lazy with the staff. The Copic tips on this, there's supposed to be Copic markers sticking out of the star. I just straight up painted the toothpicks. I didn't even try sculpting on top of the toothpicks. I think it still looks okay though. I put pipe cleaners at the top of her boots and glued on little stars, and I put a strip of the turquoise fabric around the bottom of her boots to help finish it off and make it look a little bit more like the original drawing. I painted a small star blue and stuck that in the middle of the big star for the staff. Really, that blue star should be bigger, but I could not be bothered. I glued all the headband pieces together and then tied a ribbon around the staff and also tied on the beads, the little string of beads that I made, and I also hot glued it onto the bottom of the stick just so that it would stick out at the right angle. There's also supposed to be a pink bead right underneath the big yellow star, but there's not really a way to add a bead if the stick is going into the clay, so I just used the pipe cleaner to make a little circle and glued that on. Okay, here is the final look at the little doll. I gave her a little pearl necklace as well because originally she had stars on her chest, but I just didn't want to add too many stars in the middle of her torso because she had one on her chest and then one on her belt area, so I just thought it'd be too much, so I just did a regular kind of necklace. But yeah, there she is. Yay! I hope you like her. I think she's okay for my first doll. You know, I'm a noob at this. Not as good as the pros on YouTube, but mad respect to them because I struggled to get this done in 3 days. I stayed up so late, and I know they take way longer on their dolls, but like just, you know, gotta respect the pros who put so much time into their dolls. Also, there's a little feature of Kiki and Midna because I was gifted those figures at Anime North and they're adorable. They're kind of the perfect size. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you next week for my next video.